Feldpostnummer 34480. Freude hat es mir gebracht, dass du hast an mich gedacht. Dass mir wurde aus deiner Hand so ein lieber Gruß gesandt.
Ich kann mich kaum an meinen Bruder erinnern. Er war 10 Jahre älter als ich. Dennoch war er als Wunschbild eines älteren Bruders sehr präsent. Er fiel mit 19.
Bittere Tränen oft benetzten meine Wangen in stiller Nacht. Traurig gehe ich jetzt von dannen. Traurig muss ich gehen zugrund. Mutter, warum hast du mich geboren zu solch böser Stund?
This suitcase lay unnoticed for decades in the attic of a church's parish house.
Oh God.
It's fate.
Schicksal.
The suitcase was handed over to the Brandenburg branch of the German War Graves Commission. For Oliver Breithaupt and Kathrin Krabs, it's like opening a time capsule.
A travel alarm clock.
It contains extremely personal items, worn and weathered by time. Some bear the owner's name. They smell of earth and death.
The Führer knows only struggle, work, and worry. Our role is to relieve him of as much as those as best we can.
Who was the recipient of these letters, and who might still be waiting for an answer?
I wanted to see how things are here. I hadn't been back since the attack, and it all looks so dreadful now. The main square is unrecognizable. It's a brief description.
Of what Dresden looked like.
In early April 1945.
To most people, the year 1945 is history, but to Oliver Breithaupt, it's like the present day.
Thinking of the alarm clock, it's all a question of time. You forget the present and travel back with all those images created over the course of a lifetime. When you immerse yourself in the subject, your head gets filled with the images that keep taking you back. And when you read something like that letter, it's as if time is standing still.
The suitcase belonged to Ernst Teichmann. In 1945, Teichmann was a pastor in the Harz Mountains. Shortly after the Second World War, he visited relatives in Halbe in Brandenburg. Following the battle in and around the town in April 1945, 40,000 dead were buried in local forests, fields, and front yards. Teichmann asked to be transferred to Halbe, where he began listing these makeshift graves. With the help of the church, regional authorities, and local businessmen, he created permanent and dignified resting places for the fallen. It became one of Germany's largest cemeteries for the casualties of war. Perhaps the items in the suitcase belong to someone buried in the cemetery. They might also have a special significance for someone still alive.
Now to the nitty-gritty.
Most of the dog tags belonging to members of the old German army are registered in the Federal Archives in Berlin. This is a first concrete lead.
2 soldiers, evidently killed, hence only one half of the tag. The other half would be left on the body.
I can barely read this. Today I received my husband's identification tag and a notebook, which probably did not belong to him.
Oh my, this must have gotten really wet. But look, this is a soldier's paybook. Walter Holzapfel. These are his promotions to SS squad leader, head squad leader, and senior squad leader. Plus a photo. Wow, with his name and photo.
The SS was originally Hitler's bodyguard, but evolved into the Waffen-SS elite combat force, notorious for countless atrocities during the war. Did this man, Walter Holzapfel, also commit war crimes? There's another half of an ID tag in the suitcase, coloured black.
This is from the 6th SS Jagdregiment, meaning it's an SS tag which was split as officially required. Presumably, these are Holzapfel's personal effects.
And presumably, he'd be listed in the records. Every year, about 35,000 people contact the War Graves Commission, still in search of missing relatives.
Oh.
Oliver Breithaupt searches for any living relative he could give the SS paybook to.
Oh.
To this day, there are still people buried in the battlefields of the war who are registered as missing. Joachim Kozlowski works for the Brandenburg War Graves Commission and recovers corpses across Germany.
There's supposed to be one over there. And then there's another site behind us with a second body. It always starts with a single bone.
The men were often hastily buried right where they died. But the War Graves Commission makes sure that they finally get a proper grave and, if possible, an identity. There's been a body lying here for almost 80 years. Some bones and remains of a uniform were discovered here by a crew working on a new bike path. The battle for Berlin began here near the village of Zelo in April 1945. More than 1 million Soviet and German soldiers engaged in a bloodbath lasting over 4 days and claiming close to 100,000 lives. The fate of many remains unknown to this day.
I do this because there are people waiting for information about those missing, which even includes my own family. So determining as many identities as possible is a help.
Joachim Kozlowski hopes to be able to identify yet another fallen soldier today.
We're getting to the crucial area, where we usually find the ID tag, if he was wearing one, close to the thorax area. Although as it's on a chain, it could also be lying by the skull. This is a part of his upper jaw.
So here we have a Walter Holzapfel, born September 9th, 1917 in Bielsko in Upper Silesia. Next step is to ask about the Lutheran cemetery there in Poland. I can't find a date of birth for Walter Holzapfel.
Oliver Breithaupt needs that date of birth in order to determine who the descendants are.
Here, born on September 20th, 1929. 16.
1929 would indeed mean he would only have been 16 at his time of death. The SS is known to have visited schools to recruit boys as young as 14. As the war progressed, they too were sent into battle. Might Walter Holzapfel have been one of those boys? Each item raises new questions. Questions about a time of carnage and chaos when a young man like Walter Holzapfel had a photo like this in his service book. It shows a ditch with dead people, evidently members of the Waffen-SS. Why would a 16-year-old have such a photo on him?
The
only explanation I have is my belief that war can bring out the best in a person, leading to acts of heroism. But also the absolute worst and the most barbaric. It enables us to surrender to the lowest human instincts, and even with political legitimization.
Joachim Kozlowski is still digging up the past around Zelo, looking for clues to the identity of the dead individual.
We'll need to dig a bit deeper here later. Here you can see his knee joint. I'll just get these two pieces out first.
If there are no personal items with a name among the bones, finding out who died here is often possible by looking at the metal identification tag.
Nope, nothing. A metal tag like that makes a proper signal. But I'll see what else turns up.
Suddenly, he comes across a modern cable running right through the pelvic bone. So he's not the only one to have been digging here recently.
This is bad. You can forget it. It means that whatever was found here has been thrown away. Maybe there was even an ID tag, which is presumably in private hands now. If so, well, that's appalling.
The helmet has been preserved, with a sizable hole in it, suggesting it was a quick death.
Sometimes you can still find a name written on the leather inside the helmet. Not in this one.
The skeleton is almost complete, but all clues to the identity of the person are gone.
I think it's inhumane and disgusting. But it doesn't surprise me. 75 years after the war, and you see this indifference. That's where it begins. People looking away.
Every year, about 200 new bodies from the war are reburied in Halbe. The Brandenburg War Graves Commission takes care of the cemetery, preserving memories for future generations.
You have all of Europe lying here. Frenchmen, Ukrainians, Russians, Belgians, Dutchmen and Poles, all side by side here. Those who went through these gates carried with them the greatest sorrow, the greatest pain, greatest hope, the greatest faith. But there were also some who learned nothing from history. The youngest known victim in this cemetery was only a day old. The oldest, 96 years.
About 80 million lives were lost in the Second World War.
There are between 1 and 25 dead under each gravestone. So we estimate the total number today at 15, 20, 28,000 dead in the cemetery today.
Half of the dead in Halbe Cemetery will remain unknown forever.
Unknown war casualty is paying last respects to this person. With no name, there's no remembrance.
Wer sollte sich dann an ihn erinnern?
Another suitcase full of hopes. Perhaps its contents can provide a name for one of those who remain anonymous. Oliver Breithaupt believes he has identified a village from one of the photos. Drei Annenhorne in the Harz Mountains. That's prompted a visit from Peter Lehmann. He knows the old soldiers' burial grounds in that area and might be able to match up the photographs, letters and the paybook.
We found the service book of a young SS member containing a photograph. a very young chap by the name of Walter Holzapfel. And I'm hoping that he's one of the unknown who were reburied from Drei Annenhohne.
Walter Holzapfel.
And this could be the crucial thing. We found a denture in an envelope marked Pastor Teichmann.
Bezeichnet mit Pfarrer Teichmann. Und dann kam ich auf Sie.
When I came across your article on the internet, where you talk about a denture, I was thinking, a denture is highly unusual. And then there were these items folded inside a sheet of paper. This list might look familiar to you, and these original photos.
Und diese Originalfotos.
Peter Lehmann wrote a book covering the last days of the war around the town of Wernigerode. At its center is Colonel Gustav Petri, considered the savior of Wernigerode, for having refused orders to defend the area against the advancing Americans. His courage cost him his life. The SS executed him in the woods, but no one knows exactly where his remains are buried, presumably together with other soldiers. Ernst Teichmann, a pastor in the Harz Mountains at the time, tried to give the buried soldiers a more dignified gravesite. He was able to place 5 known names on 8 of the crosses. One cross had the inscription "Unknown," while the last 2 were memorial crosses without any human remains underneath them. One of those was for Colonel Petri. In 1976, the bodies were moved to a cemetery in Blankenburg. In the process, a list was compiled of items found with the dead. It included a denture, and there were also more remains of unknown soldiers.
Of course, it could all just be a giant coincidence, with someone simply emptying a whole shelf of a cupboard into the suitcase and not caring about where everything came from. But perhaps Teichmann kept these things in the suitcase on purpose, everything connected to the men who fell in Drei Annenhohne. We found this epaulet.
The 2 men examine the photos and compare names and the case's contents with lists from the Harz Mountains.
A cross, relics, and devotional objects.
Peter Lehmann makes an initial assessment.
I think the idea is pretty speculative, because none of the names on the list appear to have any connection to Drei Annenhohne. That would have been exciting.
Das wäre sehr spannend gewesen.
Right, but staying with the speculations, we're dealing with 6 unknown soldiers. So what if it turns out that these remains belong to those 6 who were subsequently reburied? That would explain Teichmann being in possession of these remains and artifacts. The soldiers were buried as unknown, and he took those things to pass them on.
Prior to his work relocating remains, Joachim Kozlowski served 12 years in the German army. As a paramedic, he faced injuries and fatalities in the present day. Now, he's dealing with deaths from many decades ago.
From time to time, I have some contact with relatives. They come to burial services, and often they'll bring a photo and say, "This is how he once looked." It's really moving.
Once a year, the newly excavated are buried in one of the war cemeteries. There, they are granted their final resting place with dignity.
I look at the birth dates, and some of them were 17 or 18 when they died. They didn't even know what they were doing there. They were born and died as human beings. It's not my job to say who was a perpetrator or a victim. We want to keep the memory alive, There's nothing worse than this looking away and indifference that we see every day in our society. I've become an absolute anti-war advocate.
Oliver Breithaupt is looking for information in the Federal Archives in Berlin.
I've cleared this space especially for your suitcase, so we can take a look.
I already gave you a brief rundown of the story.
He's previously solved a range of mysteries here together with archivist Birgit Wulff.
You can see that it got damp. It's a soldier's paybook, something you would be interested in.
What happened to Walter Holzapfel, the 16-year-old SS officer?
Unfortunately, the photo is quite blurry.
But there's another one, Holzapfel.
You'd shown me some of his particulars, and there I have something to show you.
About Holzapfel?
Yes. Hold on a sec. We did find him, but we have no record of whether he's deceased. Unfortunately, we also have no record of whether he was killed in action or what happened to him after 43.
The archive supports the facts recorded in his service book. Whether he was shot as a deserter or died in combat will remain a mystery. But one thing is clear from the files. Walter Holzapfel was born not in 1929, but 1922. He made himself younger, possibly to save his own life. But today's meeting is also about examining other objects from the suitcase.
There was also an envelope with identification tags in the suitcase. Maybe they can all be assigned to Holzapfel. That was my assumption. But this is a reception company tag.
Yes, and this is a light tank. But you'd already sent me some scans, so we had them deciphered and actually found some information on them. The man's name was Corporal Franz Xaver Bussinger. In his civilian life, he was a mechanic. It says here that he fell on the 18th of April, 1945, near Drei Annenhohne in the Harz Mountains. The notice came from Ernst Teichmann, the pastor you mentioned earlier. And my guess is that Mr. Teichmann collected the items in this suitcase after overseeing the burial of the soldiers. Otherwise, he wouldn't have had the dog tag, or half of it.
Gradually, some of the mystery is coming to light.
And we have more reports on his passing. His former burial place was outside the Drei Annenhohne cemetery, reburied in a closed cemetery.
Franz Xaver Bussinger is buried next to 49 others in the Blankenburg cemetery. So a large part of the items could be from these soldiers. Perhaps Walter Holzapfel too is among the unknown dead. And perhaps the letters and love poems will find their recipients after all, nearly 80 years after they were written. That will now be the task of the Federal Archives. Back in Halbe, there's been further progress. A colleague of Oliver Breithaupt recognized a seal imprint that was on the bottom of the suitcase. The seal belonged to Ernst von Lüssel and has been handed over to his family.
He was in touch with Mr. von Lüssel's sister, and suddenly she opened up and wrote to him about her memories from 1945.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you for your email about the discovery of the seal imprint, which was very moving for me. I can barely remember my brother. He was 10 years older.
War 10 Jahre älter als ich.
Dennoch war er sowohl als Wunschbild eines älteren Bruders, als auch durch den nicht versiegenden Kummer meiner Eltern, meine Schwester und ich, wir waren ja nur Töchter, sehr präsent. Geboren wurde mein Bruder am 17.11.1925. Der Siegelabdruck ist etwas Persönliches von ihm. Vielleicht ein Zeichen dafür, dass es ihn wirklich gegeben hat. Ihre Edla Colesman, Geborene von Lössel.
Der auch 19.
18.
19.
17.
Guck mal, der war erst 16. 20.
18.
17. 19. 17.